Jeez, I guess I'm fucking on video already and I don't even know what I'm fucking reading. Well, I'll do one thing. I'm going to show the cover of my goddamn book to you, my ever-loving audience. Here it is. Here it is. Wait, let's get it right. Adventures in Manic Depression. Tales in Fine Madness. 40 years of writing went into this little thing, which is not selling for shit, you stupid assholes. So go out and fucking buy my book. It's the greatest thing since C.S. Lewis and Hunter Thompson and P.J. O'Rourke and Colin Firth and Superman and Batman and Batguano, and I'm the next best writer to John Fonte, my all-around hero. And on the back, see, there's little, I don't know if you can see it, characters. That's me. See, I'm floating through the underworld, and I'm saying things in little time balloons that they say, heck, Goldman is not such an asshole. He's the biggest asshole in the world. And they say all kinds of things there. It's pretty clever, and that's me in the Hawaiian shirt, and the fish are eating me. And then on the front, you see that the devil is after me as he is in real life. But I've got my Hawaiian shirt on like I've got on right now, and he's protecting me from all demonic entities. And I'm underwater, and I'm protected by the Adventures in Manic Depression. So go out and get it at Amazon.com and other stores. I hate people that do this, but Joe Carbo could do it, and he could do it with cars, and he did it with washing machines. So I can do it with a fucking book. And here it is. Go get the goddamn book. Now I'm going to pick a story and read from the book and talk while I'm doing it. So I like this shirt, and it shows my cross, it shows my hairy chest, and it shows my newly, painted. We won't go into that. So what am I going to read for you guys today? I read all kinds of weird shit. Now, let me see if I can find some. Let's see, poems. I read a couple poems. You don't hear poems, do you? Winter Drag, Arc Art. That's a good story. It's a little long. A Dimesore Tale. Yeah, I think I'm going to read a Dimesore Tale. Page 216. 216. No, I'm at 316. 216. 263, 228, 28. Obsessions, we're getting there, don't worry. 215, 216. Okay. Without further ado, now let me get my camera set up and drink one swig of my, shit. Why can't you do things with one hand in this life? Long Charm Silver did. And just to think, I was almost going to be a one-handed guy if I hadn't gotten smart and bailed out of my goddamn rotator cuff surgery last Friday. Those guys that have been hacking me up to pieces like a little octopus on a sushi platter. And I would have been cut up stew for a year while the doctors danced their death dance around me and sang incantations in Jewish and Hebrew, and Leviathan would rear up his ugly head, and Aleister Crowley would come in and they'd chant, and Krishnamurti and all those guys, and it would be a hell of a psychic ordeal. But we don't want to talk about that stuff because I'm into it, I know all about it, but I reject all of it. The only God I respect is the one God, and the only God, and his name is Jesus Christ Almighty. And that's the only God that there is, and he's the only reason I'm alive today. So if you don't like that, tough titty, said the kitty, and Jesus is the one for me, said many people, and I don't care if Bob Dylan's a Christian or not. I really don't care less. Bob Dylan is just a sad old guy now, but he was definitely indwelled by the Holy Spirit at one point. Okay, so here we go, and I'm going to try to get the light better. Okay. A Dimesore Tale. This is kind of a fairy tale, by the way. Here we go. Once upon a time, there was a young boy. He lived in a room. The room was on the second floor of a house, but the boy didn't know who lived in the other part of the house, because he did not ever come out of the room. There may have been other people in the house, or there may not have. This is not important. Sometimes in the deep of the night, the boy would arise from his bed and go stand at the window. Down below, on the front lawn, under the lone tree, stood a wolf. The wolf had yellow eyes and sharp teeth and a long red tongue. He was looking up at the boy standing in the window. The boy looked down at the wolf, and as he did, the wolf smiled up at him. The wolf called to the boy in his soft language. "Come down, little boy, come down," said the wolf. But the boy would not come down. Of course not, because if he came down, he knew the wolf would eat him. Yet something inside the boy called to go down. Something of himself actually wanted to go down. Something in him wanted to feel the bright, sharp horror as the wolf took him into his mouth and into his teeth. But the boy did not go down. No, he stayed in his room, and he did things. Many things. He read many books. Books of lands far away. Books of pirates and spaceships and dashing men with glinting swords, and stories of men who had fists of steel, stories of the great men and the Supermen and the Robin Hoods, and I can't really read this very well. God damn this fucking light. And the men came charging in, and the boys had his guns down here and into his hands. That didn't make any sense at all. And they were crying. Yes, they were, because he was scaring them away. And so the boy stayed in his story room. That's what it was. It was a story room, and it was a room in which to invent and listen to stories. Now, to explore, to find magical things. Oh yes, and one more thing. Our boy knew a secret. Yes, he did. And the secret was that in order to stay in the room, nothing could ever hurt him. Once outside was the wolf, and many other terrible things as well. But as long as the boy stayed in his story room, none of the bad things could get to him. He could not be harmed by any of them. All right, you get it now? Okay, let's move on. One night, let me get my camera angle, you little motherfucker. I will get my camera angle to this stupid Jew. One night, the boy did something strange. There was no explanation for it, really. What he did was this. He reached inside to a cabinet in the other part of the room, and there was a can of shaving cream. The boy kept all kinds of things in the cabinet. It was just the old-fashioned kind of can of shaving cream, the really thick, puffy kind that you remember, the kind that came in those bright yellow and red striped aerosol cans. Now the boy went to the window, carrying the can of shaving cream with him, and he opened the window. Then he took his can of shaving cream and he squirted it into the palm of his hand. Then the boy began to send the little puffs of shaving cream floating down and down and down out the window. Down, 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 down went the puffs. To where? It's impossible to say. They just floated off into the sky. Somehow it all was part of something much bigger. Something the boy could feel, but that he had no name for. The shaving cream puffs floating off into the sky, out into the window, out into the summer night air, out into the darkness. And so the boy sent the shaving cream puffs floating off down the night. Take this as an example of someone who is doing a bad reading, but it's going to continue onward. Anyway, off they went, the shaving cream puffs. Bye-bye. Now, down, down, down in the yard, under the tree, something moved. The boy squinted his eyes. He thought that it was the wolf watching him. But no matter how he looked, he saw nothing. After all, the shaving cream puffs had been sent off into another journey, and the boy climbed into his bed. This was where clean, and his sheets were clean and cool. So the boy pulled the blankets up to his neck. Then he settled back into the pillow. Ah, there. After a while, the boy began to do something. It's a bit difficult to explain, but if you listen real carefully, you'll understand. What the boy would do is this. He would let his mind go outside of his head. It was not a magical feat or anything like that. It was really a very simple thing to do. And so the boy's mind would float outside of his head, like the puffs of shaving cream floating out the window. And first, it would float up to the ceiling. The mind, that is. Where, this is almost getting to the point where I'm going to quit. Where first it would float up to the ceiling, where it would bounce around. Bing, bing, like that. Soon, when he got comfortable enough in its new surroundings, the mind would float off to other places. While it was out there, the mind would grow into various shapes and sizes, like a balloon that gets bigger or smaller as it needs to. Now came the really nice part. Once he knew that his mind was happily and safely on its own little journey outside of the head, the boy would do the second part of the trick. He had a name for it. He called it simply melting. What the boy would do is, the boy would kind of go all soft inside, and he would melt himself away until everything outside of him began to come inside of him. Oh, it was magic, all right. There's no doubt about that. What would happen is, the empty place inside the boy's mind, think of the Grand Canyon if you want, would fill up with all the things that went inside the boy. Do you see? Of course you do, because you're smart. Bunch of smart little kids, smart asses. And so, with all that in place, the boy would first let all kinds of things come inside him, and then he would take them and he would smell them and he would sample all the different treats, because that's exactly what they were. Special treats. Sometimes they would be things like food or music, or perhaps there were other things like two children floating down a river at night. The moon is high in the sky and they're floating down the river, fast asleep. The moon is bright and yellow and hangs low in the sky. Down below, in the water, deep down at the bottom of the water, is a woman. She's dead, and she is beautiful. Her hair floats out from her head, and her eyes are open, and they are blue, and they are nice. She is down there in the water, and she is dead. And it is good, because the water itself is a very peaceful place to be. And so, all in all, this is a very good thing. And up above, the two sleeping children would be floating down the raft, fast asleep, on their magical raft. And the best part of all was that on the tippy top of the thing floated around inside of the boy's head. Much of it was inside, and it was inside of the water. Fish floated by, saying, "Hello, hello." They made those curious little O things with their mouths about, and they looked about with big goggle eyes, all happy and amazed. Many things would float by in the water. People waving, people in bottles, children flying kites, even a girl in a black sweater, I think. Her name is Julie. She's beautiful, and she has blonde hair that floats out from her head in long tendrils. And the boy would swim around in the water that was inside the space inside his head where his mind used to be. He was inside himself, you see, and he could just float around in there all he wanted. It was a very wonderful feeling, this swimming around inside your own head, because you could go upside down or right side up or sideways or down to the bottom, deep, deep, deep down by the funnel. Some people prefer to call it a drain, but I prefer to call it a funnel. And down, 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 you could look through the crystal blue of the water, and you weren't really upside down or right side up or anything. So our boy would play like this for hours, and for days, if he wished. And finally, excuse me, and finally, when he had done melting, he would sleep. And when he slept, his mind, which had been bouncing around on the ceiling having a fine old time, would come back inside his head. Bloop! And then it too would fall asleep, because it was so very not tired from having its own set of adventures, exploring all the nooks and crannies of the boy's room. So you see, all these things work together. And that's what made it so nice. And it could happen again and again and again. The boy had learned the trick of doing it, even though he didn't think of it as a trick. All right, now we're going to tell you another story. Our boy is sleeping now, so just let him sleep for a while. Don't worry, he'll come back. We'll come back to him after a while. This story is about a parakeet. It's a parakeet named Samson. Somebody named Samson, but we do not know who. Maybe it was our boy, maybe it was somebody else. It doesn't matter, really. Samson was your typical parakeet, an ordinary green parakeet. That's what he was. Samson lived in a cage which several other parakeets at the Kresge's Five and Dime store in a nice neighborhood in Shaker Heights, Ohio. The dime store was full of all the things that are always full of, dime stores are always full of. Needles and thread, clothes, cheap but clean, little red checked tablecloths, a whole section of candles, books and magazines, balls of yarn, bottles, all that kind of things. Samson lived in the part of the store where the other animals were kept. They were, besides himself, lots of birds. They were a noisy bunch indeed. Also, the store contained many aquariums filled with snails and things. Little bubbles went bloop, 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 and the store owners played "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window" on a small radio that they kept behind the counters. All of the ladies who worked in the dime store were old, and some of them were very nice. One lady, old Mrs. Curry, once gave our boy a treat. She'd give him clean, fresh water and fresh birdseed, and every so often, for a special treat, she'd stick in a piece of fresh green celery, which the boy knew was Samson's favorite. "There you go, Bertie," Mrs. Curry would say, and then she'd kind of chirped up when she said it. She was really very old, and Samson knew she probably wouldn't be around much longer. Now, one day, oh hell, I hope I didn't do that, because that would really, really, really ruin this. Nope, didn't do it. Fuck you. I'm keeping on fourth. One day, a young woman and her son came into the store. The woman was very pretty, with dark, shiny hair and a very nice smile. Her son was named Norman. Norman was not quite as nice as his mother. He would sometimes do mean things, mostly to his little sister, Sippy. But Norman was not the kind of boy, mean child, that you could really get too mad at, because he wasn't actually mean down to the core. So Norman and his mother brought Samson home from the dime store, and they put him in a cage on a wooden table in the kitchen, and they fed him birdseed, celery, the usual stuff. On her special occasions, they let Samson fly out of his cage so that he could fly around the room and get all, his wings all fixed up. But the problem was Samson was always got lost, and he'd try to get back into the curtains, but he'd get caught and he'd get all lost inside the curtains. So finally, Samson's mother told him that Samson had to stay inside his cage. One day, Norman was home all alone. His mother was at work at this dance studio where she worked above a delicatessen in the downtown part of Cleveland. She had to work long hours, specifically after her husband, a rather rotund man named Fat Joe, left her. And later, he died of a liver ailment. He deserved it too. On this day, Norman decided that he'd let Samson out of his cage anyway, even though his mom wouldn't know. Poor old Samson needed to fly around, stretch his wings, and all that stuff. Samson's mother would only be gone for a little while, and so she wouldn't really have to know about it. Now, while Samson was flying around, batting into the curtains and stuff, Samson was a bit retarded, if you must know the truth. Norman went down into the basement, where he had a secret room that was all his own. He kept all his special things in there: his chemistry set, his inventions, his stink bombs, his comic books, Little Scrooge, Little Lulu, Mad Magazine, EC comic books, all his electric trains, all of his favorite things. Norman even had a lock on the door, and the lock was posted a sign saying, "Keep out." Well, what happened was, you probably guessed it already. While Norman was down in the room working on his inventions, Samson actually flew right into the burner of the stove. Norman's mother had left the last night's beef stew warming up on the stove, and Samson flew right smack into the middle of the flames, just like that. When Norman came upstairs from his basement, he found Samson on the kitchen floor, and he was all burned up and crispy. He really didn't even look much like a little bird anymore. Norman was now really scared, what his mother would say when she found out that her pet parakeet was dead, and it was Norman's fault. But he started thinking of ideas. His mother, too, could think of ideas. So what Norman did was, he carried Samson out into the backyard, and he buried him. He decided that that was the best possible thing to do. But there was another thing that happened. It was kind of bad. As Norman's mother was leaving the dance studio, she was hit by a car, a green 1953 Plymouth sedan, to be exact. She was killed instantly, they said. The driver of the car that killed her was never found. By now, you probably have already guessed that Norman is the boy who lived alone in the room that did the dream magic work with his head. So really, this isn't two stories at all. It's really one story. It's all the same story. But in order to understand this story, you have to go along with the fact that it must be told in a very specific fashion, which is what I'm doing. Otherwise, you will simply not understand it. So, now that you understand that, let's go back to the boy sleeping in the room upstairs. You now know that his name is Norman. He's 9 years old, and he doesn't go to school. He doesn't do a lot of the things that other young boys do. He's indeed a very special boy. Unfortunately, as Norman is sleeping, a terrible thing happens. A wicked old witch, who had been hiding in Norman's closet all this time, decides to cast a spell on Norman. The witch decides, she takes out her magic wand, and she decides to cast Norman into a deep, deep sleeping spell. That was her specialty. And then, my friends, is where our story ends, at least for the time being. Oh, don't worry, though. I know you think it's cheating but for me to end it right here, but it isn't. It's just the ending of one chapter, and it will resume in another chapter, I promise. Well, I think I promise.